as I was preparing for today, one of the things I was thinking of, there's a famous Zen story about a student who sits down with a master, and the two cups are there, and the master begins to pour tea for the student, and he pours and he pours and he pours until the water comes pouring out, and the student says, "Stop, stop, stop! What are you doing?" And the Zen master says, "Look, the lesson of this story is that you can't fill something that's already full." And as I was thinking about this course, this idea of sort of Stoicism 101, obviously, if you've sort of read any of my writing, or most of you are here, you're probably actually familiar with Stoicism in some form or another. So what I like the idea of this class being is not Stoicism from scratch to people who have never heard of it, but sort of where we review things that we think we know, but we don't actually know, right? Epictetus says, you can't learn that which you think you already know. For the Stoics, sort of the impediment to all knowledge is conceit. And so even today, when the email came into me, one of the things I liked about it was, even though I wrote it, even though I'd seen it a bunch of times, there was a freshness to it, seeing it laid out. If there's anyone who's talking, Billy, can you mute anyone who's talking?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out who that is. But
if people are talking, just mute your line, and then I'll unmute you when it's time to talk. But the idea being, look, we look at all of this with sort of fresh eyes, with beginner's eyes, and we actually learn more, even if than we would if we think we know what we're talking about. Marcus Aurelius quotes Heraclitus, this idea that we don't step in the same river twice. I actually just reread Meditations last week. This is the new Robin Waterfield translation. I had him on the podcast. It's great. But I took all these notes, if you can see, on a book that I'd already read many, many times, because I wanted to approach it fresh, as if I didn't know anything, as if all of it was new. And I think you get a lot out of that. And so the place we started with today's lesson, and obviously we're going to build on it in the next 2 weeks, is this idea of the distinction between uppercase Stoicism and lowercase Stoicism. Lowercase Stoicism being the stereotype of the Stoic as having no emotions, being closed off, being totally invulnerable, being sort of the robot. And we contrast that with Stoicism, the philosophy of the four virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, the philosophy that Marcus Aurelius talks over and over again about being concerned with the common good, the philosophy that clearly, as you see many times in Meditations, that Marcus struggles with. He struggles with his temper. He struggles with his emotions. He struggles with drives and urges and temptations. And so Stoicism isn't this place you magically get to and are invulnerable and perfect and never stray from. It's more of an ideal that you're striving towards always. So that's what I wanted to start today's with, just some thoughts as we go through the next 2 weeks. Some of the stuff you're going to be reading for the third or fourth time because you're familiar with it. Other stuff you're not going to be familiar with. But I want everyone to approach it all as if it is new, as if you're learning it for the first time. And I think that'll bring out another side to it. That's how I try to approach books as I'm rereading them. I try not to let what I know get in the way of what remains to be known. And that's all I really wanted to say. The idea of this office hours is, let's just ask questions. Let's kick stuff around. You can talk about what you like, what you don't like, what you're struggling with, what you're concerned about. And a thought here. So you guys are doing the course, or we're all doing this course together at one time. But the vast majority of people doing the course, because we closed it last night, the vast majority of people doing the course are going to be doing it later, not in this sort of live setting. So they're going to be watching this video. So as you think about your questions, the idea of there not being any stupid questions is always true, but it's particularly true here because by asking something that maybe you kind of thought you knew, but maybe you didn't, there's definitely someone who doesn't know it at all that will benefit from that question. So let's fire away. You can do two things. We can put the questions here in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or I don't know, try to do something, and Billy and I will unmute you. And oh, there, we're already seeing some. All right, so we'll just take questions and we'll get into it. Todd, let's do you first. But while you're unmuting, we have a question here. Someone's asking my personal definition of Stoicism, which I sort of define Stoicism as this idea that we don't control what happens to us, we control how we respond. And Stoicism then is a prescription for that response, the four virtues being the sort of the ideals for how one tries to respond to all situations. Some situations call for courage, some for temperance, some for justice, some for wisdom, some for all of the above. But that's this idea. How do we respond to what life throws at us? So Todd, hit me with your question.
What's up, brother?
Hey.
So question. So I've only been tuning into the podcast. I'm kind of new to Stoicism.
Yeah.
Always been a big fan of, just following just wisdom or principles that could just guide me better in life. But yeah, so I got the meditations book. I thought it was fantastic. And then I've only ever heard Cato, you talk about Cato on your podcast.
Yeah.
So like starting off, should I just I guess just dive in what I like first and then kind of just follow along from there?
That's a great question. And I think it all depends, right? So the idea of the Daily Stoic was it is hard to know what Stoic to start with, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you start with Seneca? Do you start with Marcus? Do you start with Epictetus? Sort of, and if you pick the wrong one, does that mean Stoicism is not for you? So one of the reasons I did the Daily Stoic and then why I do the email is I wanted sort of a sampling, like a tasting menu or an appetizer board or something. Like you take the ones you like and then you're like, oh, I'm a fan of that, I'm going to do more of that. But if I was sort of prescribing like where to go next in Stoicism, if someone had picked up Marcus, I'd probably do Seneca next because he's the most bite-sized and covers the widest range of topics and is probably the most accessible. So there's a great, I don't know if I have it here. I don't see it. There's Seneca's Letters from a Stoic, which I have here. Which I love the Penguin translation. But there's another short Penguin one called On the Shortness of Life, and it's a collection of essays from Seneca. I think it's called the Penguin Great Ideas series, which is very good. And then there's another recent one. Actually two from the from the Princeton University Press that I like. There's sort of little collections of the Stoics, and one is called How to Keep Your Cool, and the other is called How to Die. And so those would be like maybe a few selections from the Stoics that I might start with.
Cool. I'll start with them. Thanks, man.
All right, appreciate it. All right, let's do Christopher Myers.
Go for it.
So I'm 10. I've only been with.
What's your name?
Oh, my name's Jack.
Hi, Jack.
I'm 10 years old. I've only been with Stoicism for a few months. I've read your book, The Boy Who Would Be King, and I just wanted to know any tips you have for kids who want to be Stoics.
That's awesome. You are already well ahead of the curve, and I'm very impressed. And it's kind of incredible to think. Obviously, that book is fictionalized, but Marcus was not that much older than you when he's selected to be the emperor of Rome, and so he undergoes this training that sets him up for his whole life. And so, as you're thinking about this stuff, it's not just it's fun and it's interesting and it's great. But you're also making it's like, I'm sure your parents have talked to you about a bank account. You put money in a bank account and the interest compounds over time. Like all these books that you're reading now are going to shape you for the rest of your life. And so it's not just that you're ahead of the curve, but this will pay off for you over the course of your life. I guess earlier someone asked about my definition of Stoicism. I think this idea of like, I focus on what I do in response to what your parents say, to what your teachers say, to what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, to the situations you find yourself in. This idea of like, most people spend a lot of time and energy talking about, complaining about, resenting the things that happen that are not up to them. And if you can decide really early on in your life that you're going to focus on things that are up to you, again, this is also a huge advantage that compounds over time. right? So every minute that you don't spend complaining about the weather, that you don't, spend complaining that you have to wear glasses and other kids don't have to wear glasses, or, that you live here instead of here, all the time that you spend focusing on the parts that are up to you, as opposed to the parts that are not up to you, that's energy that you're spending productively instead of unproductively. And so that would be the big thing that I'd think about at your age. But good for you, and keep reading. And I'm really impressed.
Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, so let's see what else we got here. So someone's asking some recommendations and general things to be aware of as far as getting the most out of the course. I would say this idea of like, just do it with a beginner's mind. See it as like, sometimes you have training and then you have to go in and do retraining, or with the vaccine, right? You get the vaccine and then they make you go get the booster shot. See this as the booster shot, of a reminder of all the things that you've heard of, that you're familiar with, but it's doubling down on it. That would be the big thing. But the other thing is I would just check it every morning. I think the earlier you check it, the beginning, and maybe spend some time, obviously we talk a lot about journaling, but as you're thinking about what to journal about in the morning, what to talk about, what maybe just the Epictetus talks about how you take these thoughts and you write about them, you read them aloud, you talk to others about them. I think a big part of this is really engaging with the material in some form or another. So don't just glance at it on your phone, let it go sort of in and out of your mind, but take a minute to kind of meditate on it and stew on it, find some use for it. And I think that would have a great impact. So let's do Wendy. I'm going to unmute you here. It looks quite nice where you are, Wendy.
It's beautiful. Hi, how
Hi.
are you? It's great to see you. I live right outside of Yosemite, so it's
wow.
it's a level. Yeah. So when you gave you showed all the different philosophers and when they were philosophizing,
Yes.
Portia Cato, the Iron Woman, I had never heard of her before.
Yes.
So where do I find her, and does she have any writings, or has anybody written about her?
So I have a whole chapter about her in Lives of the Stoics.
Okay.
And there isn't too much about her, unfortunately, although I would argue there were many, many Stoic women over the centuries, especially Musonius Rufus famously says that men and women should both be taught philosophy. The problem is they just weren't recorded, right? They just weren't written about a lot. So there's not a ton about Portia Cato, but she does come up in Plutarch's essay about Cato the Younger, which is one of the sources we have. There's obviously the chapter about her in Lives of the Stoics. Let me see if I can show it to you. This is it.
Yeah.
And but then she also appears in in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar. She's a character. But other than that, there isn't, unfortunately, a ton about her. So we're trying to kind of guessing a little bit, but it was very important to me to have a female Stoic in the book, at least a historical one. And I thought she was just, a complete badass.
Yeah, right. Well, I appreciate you including her. And then the second thing is, on the Commonplace book,
yes.
How much are you putting? Are you? I mean, I'm inspired by a lot of things. So do I put everything, or am I more discerning?
So the short answer would be do whatever you want, do whatever feels right to you. I try not to answer the questions about the Commonplace book too much as far as like what's the right way or wrong way to do it, because the way I do it is obviously for me as a person, but then also my job is to use a lot of the stuff that I write down. So I always have an eye as I'm writing stuff down. Am I going to use this in some way? Right. So like the book that I'm working on right now, I'm working on a series on the 4 virtues. So my note card, I do it on the note cards, but then I have courage, temperance, justice, wisdom. And then at the top of each card, I underline what virtue this thing pertains to. So like right now, most of the research that I'm doing is specifically to find stuff to use for one of those 4 books, right? So but generally, and I've been doing it for a long time, I try just to write stuff down that's interesting. If I feel like it's getting too much, I usually I'll just take a break, because I don't want my fatigue in the moment to cost me something that, 10 years from now I'll really have enjoyed or want to reference or know about. The other little trick that I'll do is sometimes I'll just write to myself in shorthand. Like I'll just go like, really good story about X, page 23, insert book here. And so I'm not going to take the time to write it down, but I am just putting like a little breadcrumb that, if I go back through, maybe I'd need it.
Oh, I like that. I like the referencing. That's great. Thank you so much. I love being part of your community. I really enjoy it.
Thank you. The other thing I would recommend, there's a great tool out there that's sort of a digital version of the Commonplace book. Again, I do mine all by hand, but there's a company called Rome Research, ROAM. And theirs is like, it's very cool. There's some cool videos about it, but if you're looking for a more digital version, I might check that out as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Ryan.
Right. Yeah. Let's do Lance. I think Lance might have frozen. All right. John, you've got a question?
Yes, I do. So question for you in regards to the circles of control.
Yes.
The idea of controlling what you control. You posted a really good diagram on the Daily Stoic Life Facebook group.
So I accidentally mistyped that this morning. It's circles. One way to look at it would be circles of control.
Okay.
I think what he's really saying, those circles of concern. So these are the people that you can, so your first concern is obviously your stuff, what you control. And then he says, after that, there's like your spouse and your family, then your extended family, then your community, or, your neighborhood, your community, your town, your city, your state, your country, the world. Right. So it's the idea that there's these sort of concentric circles of people we're concerned about. But this is Heracles, one of the later Stoics, who unfortunately isn't in Lives of the Stoics, because other than this one thing, we don't know anything else about him. And the point of Lives of the Stoics is the lives of the Stoics. But this idea of circles of concern, it's not saying like, oh, I'm the smallest circle at the center, I'm the most important. What he's saying is that you're trying to draw the outer circles into the inner circle. And Billy, maybe could you link to this circles of concern thing in the chat so people can see it?
Yep.
But the idea is you're supposed to try to consider, ideally you want to have as much impact for the circles closest to you as possible. But the idea is you want to get to a place where you think about the community, the world, the planet, the nation, whatever, almost at the same way that you care about members of your own family. And you're supposed to be expanding that circles of concern, if that makes sense. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Kind of follow that up. I mean, how would you recommend doing that? Like, is it the idea of just putting yourself in the other person's shoes, or do you have another technique that you use to do that?
Well, so the reason I was posting that is there was a New York Times article this morning about the struggle to get to herd immunity in the United States with the vaccine. And the primary, there's obviously some people who are, convinced that it's bad for you, or they're scared of needles or whatever, or that this is all a giant hoax. But the main impediment seems to be young, healthy people, or people who have already gotten it, who are saying, why do I need this? I'm fine. Right. And so when you think about the circles of concern, the idea is to go, look, I'm in my early 30s. I've got a good immune system. I'm young. I'm healthy. I don't spend a lot of time around people. I probably don't need to get the vaccine. Right. The purpose of getting the vaccine, though, is not for me. The idea isn't about creating a wall around yourself to protect you from COVID. The idea is that if everyone collectively contributes their little part of the wall, then we get a wall around everyone, which protects the vulnerable. So I think, what I just love the idea that 2000 years ago, the Stoics were struggling with this idea. And then here in the modern world, in the midst of this pandemic, we had the perfect illustration of that idea. But the idea is how can you start to think about the way that your individual actions impact other people? So as an example with the Daily Stoic, right? Let's say the coins that we make, right? So you think it's just, okay, I'm going to make this physical product and I'm going to sell it, right? Now, what's best for me is obviously to sell it, to manufacture it for as little as possible, because then there would be more profit in it, right? And then we were buying them from this manufacturer that put them in a little plastic bag, and the little plastic bag was free. So what do I care that he puts it in a plastic bag, right? So two decisions there for me mean one thing, but for the world mean another thing. And so this idea of thinking about, so it's like, okay, I could make them in China, but perhaps they're being made with slave labor, or perhaps they're being made, in some unethical way. And then I'm also having to ship them from across the ocean, all these things. So the decision to say manufacture in the United States at a company that pays its workers a fair wage and offers them benefits, et cetera, in one sense, that comes at my expense. On the other hand, if I do the cheap one, it comes at the expense of someone else. Covering them in these plastic bags, I don't live in the ocean, so it's not a problem for me. But I'm trying to think about the environmental impact of those decisions. So I think the circles of concern become relevant to us as we make decisions as individuals, as citizens, as business people, as countries, et cetera. How does our impact ripple through the world? That's what the circles of concern is about.
That's great. Thank you.
What should we do here? Let's do Maria.
Hey everyone.
Hi.
So I had a question about, as I was reading Lives of the Stoics, we see a lot of patterns around teachers and students. So
yes.
You have a teacher and then you study under them and then you become the teacher at some point, maybe. And we see that with you as well, like with Robert Greene, and how he became a mentor to you. So I was wondering if you have any advice on finding close mentorships like that in everyday life, and also will help with career eventually.
Yeah, it is interesting. I'm not sure there's a single Stoic that you would argue was self-taught, right? They all had some direct teacher or philosophical mentor that either tutored them or taught them the philosophy. So I think that's really important. And obviously, I'm honored that we're doing this here today. I think books are a way to do that. Obviously, now there's all sorts of great platforms out there, whether it's Skillshare or Creative Live. There's all these platforms out there that you can learn things. So I do think just deciding to get explicit about it. So not go like, hey, I'm vaguely interested in X, but what's the active step I'm going to take to teach myself about that thing? So I think about that. As far as mentors go, I do think, in where we are now, the mentor apprenticeship master thing is not as explicit as it once was. Like Benjamin Franklin is an apprentice printer, but this involves a contract where his father basically sells him to his elder brother, and in sort of a forced labor exchange over a period of several years. Obviously, we're not doing that anymore. So I think it's less formal. I even tend to find that, most of the people that I might say are my mentor, I don't know if they would identify as my mentor. I've decided to learn from them. So I think it's something, I would argue it's a little more casual than it once was. And it's also something that evolves over time. So, you don't go out looking for a girlfriend or a boyfriend. You go out looking to meet someone, and then it evolves over time. The relationship evolves due to a shared connection. And so, I'll get emails from people and they'll say things like, will you be my mentor? Or they'll go, can I ask you a question? When really they should have just emailed me a question and maybe I would have answered, and then that relationship would begin. And to tie this back to Ben Franklin, there's actually something you can look up called the Benjamin Franklin effect, or the Franklin effect. And it basically, what it is that there was this guy that Ben Franklin wanted to be connected with in the Congress or Senate. I forget what it was, but he wanted a relationship with this person to learn from him. And so what he ends up doing is he hears that this guy is into collecting rare books. And so Ben Franklin goes up and asks the guy if he can borrow his most valuable rare book. And the guy's sort of taken aback, but he feels like he can't say no. And so he lets Ben Franklin borrow the book. And Ben Franklin actually has no interest in this book whatsoever. It sits on a shelf in his house for a couple of weeks and then he returns it. What the Ben Franklin effect is that once we do a favor for someone, paradoxically, we feel indebted to them because we don't want to have wasted that time. So, if somebody emails you and if you email someone and say, will you be my mentor? They're like, no, I don't have time or resources for that, right? But if you email someone and you go, hey, I'm 27, I'm thinking about leaving my job, what book should I read? And they're like, oh, read this book. Well, now it's like they're hooked, you've connected with them in some way. And then, 3 weeks later, you follow up with another short question. And then, a month later, another question. And now all of a sudden you have this, multi-month exchange. This is, in my experience, where that sort of mentor, patron, advisor relationship comes from, as opposed to like a formal exchange.
I love that. No, thank you. That's super insightful. I love the relationship aspect is just something that you struggle now when everything's just one way, like through email or so that's helpful.
And then the other thing I would add to that is like, send 100 emails to 100 people. And if 10 of them respond, that could be life-changing. I think sometimes people will just email like their favorite person in the world and then they don't get a response. And then they say, well, it's hopeless. Like there's lots of people out there. So I would also, you got to try a bunch of times.
Awesome. Thank you.
Earl, let's do you.
Hey, Ryan,
Hi.
got the dumb question for you here. So I'll be the one to raise that. I got the Stoicism 101 email today, and I was hoping you could give an overview of what we should be expecting and how, do we get these every day?
Yes.
For 14 days, and how those relate to these office hours. I understood you said ask questions, but
Sure.
Talk to what you want.
No, not a dumb question at all. So yes, there'll be an email every day for the next 2 weeks. Obviously this office hours, there's less to talk about specifically because we're only 1 day in. I think Billy, do you want to post the questions again or the schedule again? I think there's one Wednesday. Anyways, the idea, so there'll be a bunch of calls and you can ask me anything about Stoicism in general, about specifically what's been in the email. I'd love to get in some debate about what's, what people like, what people don't like, what's not clear, what is clear. So the idea is just for this to be a discussion. And if you remember in college, the idea is you go to class and then the professor has office hours where you get to go ask them about what you're learning about in class. And the irony I remember in college, you have these people who are experts about what they do. And of course, nobody ever takes them up on the office hours. And so I'm so glad that at the start, we've got all these people in here and we can ask anything and everything. So let's do Sarah.
Hello.
Hi.
So Ryan, I was curious about what you do personally to stay mindful of living Stoicism rather than just having it be a philosophy that you think about, because I think a lot of people intellectualize it. It's so interesting.
Yeah, so I read this book a few years ago from Jimmy Carter, and he was talking about, obviously he's a sort of a devout Christian, and he was talking about, I don't know if he made this up or he heard about it, but he said, okay, let's say there was some persecution of Christians, he was saying, in the modern age. And he said, let's say someone accused you of being a Christian and you went up on trial. And he said, would you be convicted? Right? So not what you said, but would you be convicted of actually living the ideas? Which I found to be quite beautiful. And so one of the things, I was actually just writing about this in the journal this morning, because the journal entry today was about, sort of, who do you want to be? Are you living your words? I try to think on a regular basis, like, if nobody knew what I wrote about, would an outside person describe me as a Stoic? So what I think is interesting about Marcus Aurelius is that, yes, he writes Meditations, but let's say Meditations hadn't survived, and we're just reading his entry in the Historia Augusta, or let's say we're reading about him on his Wikipedia page. Would we find him to be a philosophical emperor even then, even without his sole sort of philosophical work? So I think thinking about legacy in that aspect, not because you're trying to impress people necessarily, but it's a decent proxy for stepping back and evaluating yourself. It's like, would a disinterested party, sort of judge you by the idea, but judge you based on your actions, not based on what you've said? And so to me, that's sort of like a rule of thumb that I try to use. And I would be, to be very forthright with you, I'm not sure how often I would be convicted. And so that's the idea of like, there's more work to be done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Maureen.
Oh, you took me by surprise. Can you hear me okay?
I can. What's your question?
I'm delighted to be here, I have to say. And it's kind of maybe, once again, a stupid question, but I spent my professional life as a professor of rhetoric. So it's very ironic for me to be studying Stoicism.
Yes.
And I'm delighted to do it. But I want to share something that gave me pause that may be true for other people. When I thought about doing this, I thought, well, maybe I should be a hell of a lot younger than I am, and aspirational and ambitious and in the workplace. And, I wish to hell I'd known this when I entered military service, where I did 20 years of service. And some of the principles I did acquire in military service, and some of the principles I know from my own studies. But here at 63, I'm asking myself, do I want to spend my time like this? And what will I gain from it for this sort of, Jane Fonda calls it the last quarter of the game?
Sure. Well, what I think is particularly moving about Meditations is that it's written by Marcus as an old man, very old by Roman standards.
Mm-hmm.
And he's writing then the same things that he's always believed, that he's struggled with since he was a boy, and he's still trying to work on them. And he even says at some point, he says, the most pathetic thing is for the mind to give up while the body's still going. Meaning he's talking about people who sort of quit, when they've still got stuff in the tank. And to me, what he's referring to is people who sort of go, I'm stuck in my ways. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, right?
Right, and I don't want that.
Yeah. So I think the idea that it's not too late for any of us, to me is inspiring and moving. And there's a story, I think we told it in the launch video for this, of Marcus being seen leaving the palace as an old man to go learn philosophy from Sextus the philosopher. So I think it's something we engage in our whole life. I would say that as a professor of rhetoric, have you read any of Marcus's letters to his teacher Fronto?
No.
So the only letter, other than Meditations, the only documents that survive to us from Marcus are the letters, the exchange of letters between him and Fronto, his rhetoric teacher. And they're quite lovely, if only because his rhetoric teacher doesn't particularly like philosophy and teases Marcus about his love of Seneca and books and all of these things. So they have a very affectionate relationship. And I think as a rhetoric teacher, you'd really like it.
Oh, I can argue myself out of this. I'm happy that you argued me into it. Thank you.
All right, great. Nathan, it looks like you're talking to us from quite a podcasting studio.
Yes, this is my COVID closet. The kids got the home office, and so I'm literally in a little closet here.
Nice.
So yes, hi, thank you for doing this. So when you referred to this as, office hours, I was thinking back to my college days, and I was that kid who would go and take advantage of office hours. I would talk to the professors like, why did I get an A minus, not an A, and want to like
Yeah, sure.
dissect. And so I was thinking about that, and the ideas of Stoicism. How do you measure it? I think that's really my question. How do you know if you're being more courageous, if you're having more temperance, justice, wisdom, and all the little drop downs from that? Because it's, on one hand, it seems like, if you just kind of look at your life and say, oh, you're getting better at it. But, I was reading something of yours recently that talked about like, look at this as practice. And, any practice, sports, music, whatever, you usually have a lot of good feedback. But with the concepts of Stoicism, it's just, for me at least, a lot harder to know, like, am I doing this right? Like, and not that there's a right or wrong way necessarily, but do you know what I mean? Like, how do we
I
know
do.
if we're on the right track?
No, it's tricky, and I
And
can't,
growing.
I can't tell if it's something important or if it's sort of something that's just a byproduct of how we've come to see education, that our first impulse is, how do I score this? How do I measure it? Is that a result? Is that how education is supposed to be done? Or is that what happens when you have an educational system designed to teach at scale for an industrial society / world, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what I would say that the best metric would be, although it probably loops back to what we were talking about earlier. Is it visible in your actions? Are you losing your temper less? Are you kinder? Are you doing more things for other people? Is fear or anxiety less prevalent in your life? Now, are these things you can measure like on an Apple Watch? Probably not. But maybe part of Stoicism is developing that sort of internal sense for what's working and what's not working. There's a letter that Seneca writes to Lucilius where he says, like, how do I know that I'm making progress? And he says, because I'm becoming a friend to myself, meaning that he's feels less shitty about himself, and he's less hard on himself, and he's more aware of himself, right? And more loving towards himself. So the other thing I would say is just because the Stoics were sort of rigorous and there's this self-discipline and they were driven, I'm not sure also that necessarily translates as a Stoic needs to get an A and then is mad at themselves that they got an A minus, right? I think part of it is this idea of like, no, I feel better. Like, not I feel better because I've abandoned all standards and I'm just resigned, but I feel better because like I'm encouraging myself and I'm getting better, at who I know that I'm meant to be.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's do, let's see here. Steven.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Hi.
I have so many questions, but I will start with actually something that Maria Vargas was talking about earlier with mentoring. And I just wanted to say that I did your New Year, New You challenge back in January, and the Slack community there turned out for me to be a wonderful mentor. So if she wants mentorship, and it was all in that kind of informal relationship building kind of way, learning together. But that's a great, I would highly recommend engaging in the Slack community for mentorship opportunities. And the question really is like, do you have any tips or advice on how we can really leverage that Slack community for whatever this challenge is about to throw at us?
Yeah, I do love the idea of accountability partners. So maybe you develop a goal or a practice or a thing you're going to work on, and find someone, and I've seen people do this in the channel over the years as we've done them, the idea of like, okay, we're going to check in with each other once a week. Like I've talked about this, I'm in a sort of a mastermind group with a bunch of authors, and we meet for about one weekend a year. We all go to we rent a house, we all get together, and we just sort of check in with each other on what's working, what's not working. We sort of critique each other's work from afar. We solve problems for each other. But the idea of having someone, like in Alcoholics Anonymous, you have a sponsor, the idea of an accountability partner. So choosing someone you kind of check in with each other, see how you're doing. I think that might be a way to do it as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let's do, what do we got here? Let's do the other Ryan here. Ryan Seiwald.
Yes.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can. Great name.
Thanks, you too. And yeah, you're not very often someone in Texas pronounces my last name right. I get Seawald usually. So thank you. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
But my question for you is about something I saw in the reading today. You said you can't control the disasters that life throws at you, but how you respond to them with courage or cowardice or not at all is entirely up to you. And obviously in the case, I forgot exactly who it was talking about, but disaster struck them and they had to respond to it.
Sure.
But what do you do if, like, you make the mistake that causes the disaster and you have to like right the mistake and move forward? Because even
Sure.
at my young age, 22, I look back and I'm like, wow, like I did that wrong. Like I heard someone doing that. And I don't really know how to dig myself out of this hole that I've kind of put myself into. So,
Well, I would argue that that's probably more the rule than the exception. I would say most disasters are not visited upon us by the outside world. We invite them in, right? Or we make them sort of unforced, as they say in sports. Most errors are unforced errors, not done by the brilliance of your opponent. So we tell the story in today's email about Zeno and the shipwreck. He washed up in Athens, he loses everything. So we don't know enough details about this specific event. So we can't, get too granular about it. But would it change anything if the shipwreck was his fault? If he had been drunk, or if he had rejected the advice, if they said, hey, no, there's a storm coming, don't go. And he said, oh, I can handle it. And then he lost everything. It changes it in the sense that there might be a more specific lesson for him to learn. But the result, him losing everything and washing up in Athens and having to reimagine or rewrite the future of his life, remains the same. So I think no matter what happens, whether it's our fault or not, this idea that you can't go backwards, you can't stay in the same spot, all you can do is move forward. It's the same. It brings you back to the same point. So I think we can go two ways. Sometimes we can be in denial about whether it's our fault, and as a result of that denial, refuse the opportunity to move forward. Then in other times, we're so consumed by the fact that it was our fault, that we were guilty, that we made the mistake that we didn't have to, that we dwell on it and we beat ourselves up about it. And the result is also that we fail to move forward. So I think what we're really talking about is how do you move forward? How do you focus on what you do next?
Awesome. Thank you.
Jill, what have you got for us?
So my question goes back, probably a question,
Okay.
discussing the idea of what somebody brought up, Slack, mentors. So I always feel torn. I'll go a little like Cal Newport, get off of everything. And it does feel very peaceful, but then especially in, the time of a pandemic, then I start to think, I'm living in my own world, right?
Sure.
Which also, Stoicism is, you should be out in the larger community.
Sure.
But then the question is, well, is the internet a community in that sense? So I guess my question to you is mainly, what role does the internet play in this grand scheme?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. So I'm interviewing Cal again for the podcast on Thursday, maybe. So I will ask him this very question. But I agree. I think it's been tricky in the pandemic because on the one hand, a lot of important social interaction or community has, been, if not impossible, then severely constrained. And then that can draw you towards these online tools, this connectedness, which is good. But then it's also at your fingertips, and it can be overwhelming. So I think there's a tension between it. I like something like this where it's sort of like a 2-week thing, and there's some boundaries around it. Generally, I try to limit the access points that sort of random people have into my life. at the same time, I like to have really open channels with the people who are important to me or who I do get things out of. So does that make sense? So maybe that's the balance. It's like, it's sort of closed off generally, but then you are also, call, text, email me, show up at my house if, anything happens that's important to your group of people who are sort of in that circle. So maybe I think it's sort of about finding the balance between those two extremes.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. Yeah, I think so. That's what I was feeling like. Okay, I cut people off because we do depend on these tools. So thank you.
Yeah. Monica.
Hello, everyone. I was going back to the whole, how do you kind of measure? There's no measure, but really personal story in a moment for me where I realized that the practice was working for me. Me and my family, my kids were exposed to COVID during this time. And I normally probably would have gotten upset in how I felt like the information wasn't handled properly to relate to us what we were exposed to. But then I thought to myself, you know what? It happened. What can I do now going forward? There's no need to dwell on, the past and what happened and, and going back and forth about that. And then I just sat there for like a few minutes and I was like, wow, this is a different response than you normally would have given. And I was, that was my way of kind of measuring where I was at with this, being in control of, your emotions about what's happening to you in the world right now. Well, so I just wanted to share that.
I'm very glad you did, because it brings up a couple things. So your point here about experiencing it, being exposed to COVID, I would say maybe the way we really measure Stoicism, whether we're making progress, it's less in the day-to-day and more, where does it come, how does it come up in moments of crisis or, moments of pressure or stress? Because that's really where it matters the most, right? If you're incredibly calm with the day-to-day nonsense, great. But can you be calm and controlled when a whole bunch of things are being thrown at you and your family is counting on you? So I think we really want to measure ourselves in these important moments. And Monica, I had a similar experience. We ended up having to take my youngest son to the doctor for his sort of routine checkup. And the next day he woke up with being very sick. And so it was sort of this alarming thing where we knew we were in a bubble, and then all of a sudden that bubble gets burst. And so anyways, there's this window. We went to get the test. This is when tests were not super common. And so, there was like 3 days between the test and the result. And I remember sort of trying to think of Stoicism there, where it's like, if you've ever heard the example of Schrodinger's cat, it's like this cat in a box and you can't see in the box. And so is the cat alive or dead? I was thinking of that because it's like, we either have it or we don't have it, right? And the only thing that's uncertain is when the news will be delivered. And I remember thinking, and I don't think I did a particularly great job, so it was is sort of an example that I had to work on it more. But it was like, am I going to waste the next 3 days being anxious about something that's already decided, right? So the question is the news going to change the behavior in any way? Is it going to undo what's happened in any way? No. So really the question is, how am I going to spend the next 3 days? Am I going to spend it biting my nails? Am I going to spend it, miserable? Am I not going to play with my kids? Am I not going to get my work done? Like, how am I going to use this time? So that was a great example of it for me. And I'm really glad you shared this. And the third thing I would say in response to what you're saying is, this doesn't all have to be questions for me. If people want to share, examples or their own experiences with the ideas, that can be just as valuable, and I can learn as much from you guys as the other way around. Let's do Tyler.
Hi, can you hear me decent?
I can.
Okay, cool. So I guess my question's more on the implementation of like Stoicism in your daily life and stuff like that.
Okay.
And how to like hold yourself accountable in a sense.
Sure.
For like virtues and whatnot. So like, say like in a normal workplace or something like that, you find yourself getting angry with like a customer or something like that. say your response at the beginning isn't what you would consider very stoic, but afterwards you kind of have the realization of what you should have done and you feel remorseful for the way and you wish that you could have done it the opposite way, you know, like a more stoic way. Is that still on the right track?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course. So I think first off, this conversation you're having with yourself, like you did an action and then you're reviewing the action. That is what the philosophy is, right? This is what meditations is. This is what Seneca's letters happen to be. Seneca even writes a letter about how every day he puts the day up for review and says, you know, where did I fall short? Where could I have done better? Where did I lose my temper? Where did I make progress? So I think a big part of Stoicism is having that sort of ongoing observational dialogue with oneself. Now, obviously, nothing you can do can change the fact that you were rude to this person or shut them down in some way or close yourself off to them in some way. Of course, you can apologize, and perhaps moving forward, part of that is apologizing. So, you know, you're articulating out loud what you're trying to do differently. But I think the primary thing here is catching yourself, trying to evaluate how that unfolded. And so the next go around, you're doing it a little bit differently. And cognitive behavioral therapy is a little bit like this. It's sort of, okay, what are the patterns that I get into? What are the signs that this pattern is beginning? And then how can I interrupt that pattern and replace it with a different pattern that I find to be more productive, healthy, kind, etc.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Nora.
Hi.
Hi.
Look,
Can anyone else hear her? I can't. No, you were breaking up, Nora.
Look, I was wondering about sharing Stoicism with other people. I find I am not very clear, and I find it's better just to not say anything and just be.
Yes. I would agree. I would say first and foremost, we teach Stoicism by example. I forget which pope it is, but there's a pope who said, you know, sort of preach all the time, use words when necessary. And I think that's a great way to think about it. So how does one sort of live the ideas rather than speak about them? Now, obviously, my job is to speak about Stoicism and to write about it and talk about it. But obviously, on the individual level, I think about, you know, what do my actions say? But when I think about sort of bringing people on board, I think if you go, here's this big ancient philosophy with all these ideas and these names you can't pronounce, I think that's when you lose people. I like to start with quotes or core concepts that are really relevant in specific situations. So this is why we do videos. This is why we have TikTok. This is why we have Instagram. That's why we do the email. I try to distill the idea down to a really simple, straightforward thing that solves a specific problem for a person. And then if interested, they may then explore that rabbit hole further. Let's do TrainWise.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi.
Hi, man. So first of all, I'm super grateful to be here, and I'm honored. And I know that you're a humble man, but you've changed my life, and I appreciate it. And
I love hearing that.
I'm so freaking nervous by talking to you because I listen to you every single day. So there's something that you said on Audrey, I think it was Audrey Marcus, where you said someone approached you and they said they've read your book 7 times. It was like 70 hours.
Yeah.
I'm kind of that person. So
all right,
please, you know, bear with me with my animation.
Okay.
Here. So what you've done, I'm Greek descent, and you've kind of pulled me in to my ethnic origin. And I tried to dismiss it many years, but you've pulled me back. And I found out that I do live a Stoic lifestyle. Just never realized what I was doing. But there's some things that need refining. Now, for this year, I know with COVID and all that, I'm going to try and go Greece. And I've booked a philosophy tour as well with my children, and we're going to be going to like the first place of Plato.
Mhm.
But what I wanted to ask you is there any places that you know of that were Stoic in the, like the beginning of Stoicism? Like, I know
Sure.
Greece is one, but there's Rome and there's other countries as well. So I just want to know.
Yes. So I have not been to Greece. I was supposed to go sort of what ended up being the pandemic. So I haven't been. I've been to Rome several times. You know, I like to go sort of anywhere that's old, and I like to just sort of take a minute to just think about all the countless generations of people who've stood where I've stood and what they were thinking about and what they were worried about. And then I sort of think, as Marcus talks about in meditations, like, where are they now? What happened to them? Right? Where did that all go? So I think you can do that anywhere. But I'm quite jealous of the tour that you're going on. You can visit the Stoa Poikile, which is where Stoicism started. So I would look that up. That's the painted porch, famously.
That was in the newsletter today, wasn't it?
Yeah. So you can check that out. You know, in Rome, you can see on the Appian Way, there's a sort of a big pile of stones in what they think was Seneca's tomb. So you can visit that. Obviously, you can see lots of different sites. You know, in Lives of the Stoics, we have like a map of like the places, and there's a key that sort of describes. Actually, wait, this is also in the Boy Who Would Be King. We pick some sort of big moments in Stoicism. One of the ones, the last cool ones that I did, this was in, I think, November of 2019. In Budapest, there's a Roman set of ruins called the Quincum, which is where Marcus lived for an extended period of time towards the end of his life. And they think that he wrote chunks of meditations there. So that's, you can walk through this little town and you could kind of think of Marcus, you know, sitting in one of these buildings, you know, writing meditations. There's a Roman bath there that you can actually go to. It's the same spring that, you know, when Marcus talks about bathing and washing off the dust of life, you know, it might have been in this very thing that 2,000 years later you're experiencing. So there's lots of cool stuff like that. Yes, your tour sounds awesome. So I'm jealous.
Before I go, sorry.
Yeah.
Trainwise. So my name is George. The Trainwise is my business name. I don't know what. And I texted you a long time ago, and I'd like to again reaffirm. I'm so glad that I'm alive at the same time as you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for what you've given. I'm getting emotional. I got to go.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, look, let's do one more question. And then just as a reminder, I'm obviously not going to be able to get to all the questions in every one of these. We're going to do 4 more. So there should be time if people doesn't have a question, if people don't get to ask it today. And then I will also try to go through and get some of the questions that we missed, and we'll record answers and we'll send those out to you guys, or we'll write answers or something like that. So let's do, Lance, because we tried you earlier and you froze. What do you got for us, Lance?
Yeah, my question has to do with justice and trying to separate out the concept of like how we think of it nowadays in courtrooms and things like that as something that's served to you when you've done something wrong. And I can't imagine that that's what the Stoics had imagined it being.
Definitely not. And it probably says something about where we are as a society, that when we think justice, we think, is it legal or not legal? Like, will I be punished by the court for this, right? So I told you I'm doing my next book series. I'm doing one book on each of the 4 virtues. So not that I want to spoil it, but I'm still working on what I think about this virtue as I begin to research for that book. So I've written the first one, starting the second one. Justice will be the third one. But maybe one quick definition of justice to the Stoics was sort of treating people as they deserve to be treated. So something akin to fairness, right? Something akin to fairness, something akin to dignity, respect, honesty. Marcus would say, you know, it's justice is doing the right thing, right? So just because something is legally allowed doesn't mean that it's just, or that the Stoics would say you should do it. I think for the Stoics, justice is sort of integrated into their sense of right and wrong.
Okay. Awesome.
Well, awesome, guys. This is great. The last question, someone here is asking for the best translation of Marcus. So this is my favorite. This is the Gregory Hayes translation for the Modern Library. I don't know if there's an ebook or an audiobook version. So I would check this out. It's my absolute favorite. But as I said,
there is an ebook.
I just read the annotated edition from Robin Waterfield, which I thought was quite good. And then I did a 2-hour set of interviews with him that came out on Wednesday and Saturday on the podcast. So if you're looking to do a deep dive into meditations or a translation of meditations, that would be a great place to start. Well, this was awesome. I will talk to you guys in a few days. Billy will post the other days of the chat or of the office hours in here just to be sure. It'll be in tomorrow's email as well. But I'm looking forward to this, and thank you guys for doing it. It was an honor. And looks like we've got 325 people who showed up today. I want to see at least this many people in the next one. It's always interesting to watch the drop off as the courses go. People start out being very intentional, and then life gets in the way. Well, let's make sure that doesn't happen. And I will see you all very soon.